There's an entire generation of people who remember both rotary phones and the first iPhone launch, and psychologists can't quite figure out where to put them. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, you're on the tail end of Gen X, but you're hardly a millennial, even though everyone keeps trying to shove you into one of those boxes. You're what researchers started calling an Xennial around 2014. Some sociologists have even labeled this group a microgeneration because the window is so specific. What happened during that slice of history created something genuinely worth examining. So today we're going to explore what makes them interesting from a psychological perspective. From the start, you spent your childhood in an analog world, where boredom was something you simply sat with, where you actually had to remember phone numbers, and not to mention the dread if you missed your favorite TV show, it was just gone. Then one day, right as you were moving into adulthood, the entire world went digital. Not gradually, suddenly. The timing of this shift had consequences that are still playing out. Most generations grow up entirely in one technology paradigm or another. Xennials, however, went through both of these life-defining experiences during the years when you were still discovering yourself. Your late teens looked very different from your 20s, and the gap between those stages was wider than what most generations experience. Well, think about your daily life back then. Remember how much of your teens were spent passing physical notes in class, having conversations that disappeared into thin air, making plans without the ability to text running late or where are you? You simply showed up and hoped your friends would be there. And that required a completely different kind of trust, a different kind of commitment. Then you entered your 20s and suddenly everyone had cell phones. You registered with Friendster, then MySpace, then Facebook. Before social media, most people had three ways to contact someone: their home phone, their work phone, or physically showing up at their house. And then almost overnight, you had 17 messaging apps and you figured it out. During your formative years, you lived in both worlds. Research on brain development shows that the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for adapting to new situations and learning complex skills, continues maturing until about age 25. A study published in Nature Neuroscience found that this region develops well into the 20s. That means Xennials were still in a high plasticity window when the technological landscape completely shifted. You were young enough that new technology felt intuitive, but old enough to remember what came before it. Gen Xers, who were already adults when digital technology emerged, can sometimes feel skeptical of it. Younger millennials have little memory of life without the internet, but if you're in a Xennial, you've experienced both, and that creates a kind of psychological bilingualism that's relatively rare. You can hold a face-to-face conversation without checking your phone every 30 seconds, and yet you don't feel anxious learning new software. You remember what it felt like to be unreachable for hours at a time, something many younger people have never experienced. And at the same time, you're not intimidated by technology the way some older generations are. And this shows up in subtle ways. For example, you probably have a different relationship with privacy. You grew up in a world where embarrassing moments faded into memory instead of living forever online. That seventh grade haircut, that breakup, that drunk night at a party, there's no permanent photo archive. It survives only in stories. Yet that creates a fundamentally different relationship with your past. Your memories could evolve. They could become narratives. They could shift over time the way human memory naturally does. You weren't trapped by documentation. Research on autobiographical memory suggests that recall is fluid. The brain edits experiences, preserves what feels important, and lets the rest fade. When everything becomes permanently documented and searchable, that natural process changes in ways we're still trying to understand. But here's where things get more complicated. You also entered the job market around the 2008 financial crisis. That means many of you experienced economic instability during the exact years you were supposed to be building stability, and that timing matters. Research on economic hardship shows that financial trauma during early adulthood can leave lasting psychological effects. Even when circumstances improve, the imprint often remains. It shapes how you think about money, about risk, about security. It doesn't just disappear. So you have a generation that learned to adapt to massive technological disruption while also being economically burned at a critical stage of development. You can handle change because you had to, but you might also carry an underlying thought in the background. What if it all falls apart again? And almost no one talks about that combination. The public conversation tends to frame Gen X and millennials as two clear categories, as if everyone born between 1965 and 2000 shares the same experience. But specific birth years, especially during periods of rapid change, create very distinct psychological patterns. Xennials live inside a paradox. You inherited Gen X's independence because you grew up before helicopter parenting became common. Your parents often didn't know where you were for hours, and that was normal. You learned to solve problems alone, to entertain yourself, to tolerate boredom and frustration without immediate intervention. Yet you reached adulthood during the early optimism of the internet, when technology was believed to connect everyone and fix everything, before we realized it might also complicate things. And it's a strange position to occupy: independent and cooperative, skeptical yet hopeful, digital but deeply analog. What defines Xennials may be this ability to hold contradictions without discomfort. You remember the before and you remember the after, which means you can see what was gained and what was lost. You may not romanticize the past the way some older generations do, because you genuinely appreciate modern conveniences. But unlike many younger generations, you still recognize what disappeared. You lost the ease of being unreachable. You lost the patience that comes from waiting. You lost a kind of presence that existed when attention wasn't constantly divided, but you gained connection, information, possibility. If you're an Xennial, you may feel like you don't fully belong anywhere. Too young for some things, too old for others, caught between two worlds. That's not a flaw. It's the defining feature of your experience. In a world that keeps accelerating, having already lived through one major transition may be one of your greatest strengths. You learn that environments change and that identity can adapt without dissolving. The Xennial experience matters not because it makes you superior, but because you matured during a rare historical pivot point, and that taught you something many are still trying to master: how to adapt without losing yourself in the process. If this resonated with you, I'd appreciate you subscribing. And if you'd like to support the channel and help me continue making content like this, consider becoming a member. Your support genuinely means a lot. I have a few more videos queued up that I think you'll connect with, different topics, same depth. I'll see you in the next one.